Hi there, and welcome to the Alberta Update, a look at what's happening in your province. I am your host, Bruce McAllister. Thank you for being with us, as always. Coming up on the program, the Premier will drop by. Of course, the federal budget was dropped this week. We will get reaction and talk about what it means to Albertans. Plus, Public Safety and Emergency Services Minister Mike Ellis will join us to discuss the province's commitment to crack down on crime and some other developments. And Minister Jason Nixon will be here to talk about the housing market and keeping the federal government in its own lane, all that and much more on this episode of the Alberta Update. And we'll begin, as we always do, or try to, with the Premier when she makes time for us. And with your schedule, I know it's tough. Premier, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Bruce.
Listen, let's start with the federal budget. I think your finance minister said this is the equivalent of pouring gasoline on a fire when it comes to inflation and what we're dealing with in the country. Your reaction to what the feds announced this week?
It's pretty shocking. I mean, I think it was described best by one of our officials when they were briefing us. They're overspending, they're overtaxing, they're over-borrowing, and they're over-interfering in our jurisdiction. In fact, I think Trevor Toome gave some analysis saying that if they had just held to the spending plan from 2022, they'd be running a surplus this year. I mean, that tells you just how much they're spending. And the problem is that when the federal government does overspend, and they're adding more gasoline to this fire of inflation, it just means that it's going to cause the Bank of Canada to take a pause when it comes to reducing rates. And that is the most important thing to bringing affordability down, is that if we could have interest rates come down so that when people have to remortgage their homes, they're not going to have those extra mortgage payments. If we didn't continue to see the kind of inflation that we're seeing being caused by the carbon tax, as for instance, then people would be able to find it more affordable to be driving to work and driving their kids to soccer practice, and it would cost less with all of the goods that we purchase, including the food in the grocery store. And so this is the real problem that we have, is that the federal government seems to have a disconnect, that when they're overspending beyond areas that are in their jurisdiction, not focusing on the areas they should be spending on, it really is just making life more unaffordable and harder for Canadians. To try to sell this budget as somehow having generational equity is the exact opposite of what it's doing. It's saddling future generations with a future that looks like more debt and more taxes.
Well, let's pick up on the debt angle. I'll ask you one more. We could talk about this all day long, but when it comes to debt, I've read so many articles on this, so correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm sure you will. Are we now spending more on our federal debt than we are on healthcare in this country? And if that's the case, if that's correct, what are we going to do in Alberta to push back against all this?
It is so wild. This is the problem when you have high interest rates and debt comes up for renewal. Then you have to pay those higher rates. And it's the same for a household when they're facing a mortgage renewal as it is for the federal government. So with their debt repayment right now, their interest charges have gone up to $54 billion, on their way to $60 billion. And they only spend $51 billion in the health transfer. So when you think about the things that you're foregoing by having this lump of money year after year after year that is going to purchase nothing of any value to anyone, that is really frustrating, because there are priorities that the federal government should be investing in. They should be investing in national defense. They should be investing in strategic infrastructure. They should have come up with some kind of program to replace the historic gas tax sharing program that they had based on the GST revenues. And so this is the real problem with the federal government, is that they seem to want to spend in provincial areas of jurisdiction without thinking of how they can spend money in a way that will actually increase productivity rather than dampen it. And that's a real problem.
Well, they're clearly not learning from the courts, and that leads us nicely into my next question for you. A federal court ruling in Ontario confirming yet again that the federal government, as Bill C-69, the Impact Assessment Act, is unconstitutional, and this follows a very similar ruling from the Supreme Court. Are you hopeful that they might repeal this unconstitutional bill?
Well, I think in some ways the die is cast here when the Supreme Court, which is sort of the ultimate referee of what the constitutional authorities are, comes down and chastises the federal government, saying this is not cooperative federalism. You cannot legislate in an area of provincial jurisdiction, change your law. I think we have an expectation that the federal government is going to change their law. So allowing, I think in this particular case, it was a highway project that Ontario wanted to be able to move forward on, and the federal government was interfering. We knew that they were going to do that. This is the reason why the bill was found to be unconstitutional in the first place, is it was getting into all kinds of areas that have traditionally been provincial jurisdiction. Anything that's within our borders should be decided by our provincial governments, and I think the Supreme Court has sided with us once again, so I'm glad to see that. And we had been told that the changes to that act were going to be coming through the Budget Implementation Act that they have at the federal level. So we wait and see. We hope that they're not trying to find some way of skirting around what the Supreme Court said and making us fight this all over again, because I think that would be disingenuous.
Indeed. A couple of questions on the healthcare front, and I'll roll maybe two into one. Alberta's government, we know, has worked with the Alberta Medical Association on a new physician compensation model. What does that mean for primary care? And then some good news when it comes to attracting more doctors in the province.
What we've been hearing from the doctors, and I totally appreciate this, is the administrative burden of doing a strictly fee-for-service type of model. And so we're trying to move to a point where we're helping them with some of their overhead and administration costs so they can hire more team members, helping them as they roster patients to be able to get some dollars to offset that, but also incentivizing them to spend time with patients face-to-face, as well as spend more time with patients who have complex needs. And we think that will deliver the best quality of care. What we would like to see is a patient panel size, a minimum of 500 patients, and then be able to give each doctor more money the more patients they take on. Because, for instance, there are some doctors in Central Alberta. I think one has a Central Alberta practice where he and his wife have over 4,000 patients between them, and they figured out a very efficient way of being able to get their patients through. And so those are the kind of things that can happen in a team-based practice. So we're very, very keen on creating incentives for doctors to increase their patient panels so that every single Albertan can have access to a family care practitioner.
Hey, nurse practitioners are going to be part of the solution. I know you've been saying that for quite some time. Where are we on that front?
Well, the nurse practitioners are very highly trained nurses. I think a lot of people confuse an LPN, licensed practical nurse, with a nurse practitioner. They're different things. A nurse is trained in many ways, just like a family doctor, maybe with a couple of areas where they might have to defer to somebody who has a higher level of training, but they can do at least 80% of the primary care work that a doctor can. And so we figured that they should be able to set up their own primary care practices as well. And we've been pleased to see that they're happy to work with us or willing to work with us on having a practice of a minimum of 900 patients, and then they also will be compensated in the same way, where they get more dollars depending on having more patients. And once again, I think in combination of rewarding doctors that way and rewarding nurse practitioners that way, we anticipate that every single Albertan is going to have access to a practitioner. That's where we need to start, because anytime you have something wrong, the first stop should be a family practitioner who knows your history, who's going to give you that cradle-to-grave type of care, going to give that comprehensive care type of approach, and able to hand you off to a specialist when you need it, hand you off to a surgeon when you need it. But we have a system that's broken, and oftentimes people don't have that connection. We've got to make that solid connection once again.
You also had an announcement this week with the Minister of Affordability and Utilities concerning the regulated rate option. Everybody has been raising the alarm bells about fluctuating rates and unexpected hikes. You addressed that this week. Explain to us how.
Well, we're calling it the rate of last resort. I hope that people start referring to it as roller. So we're going to roll with this one. And it's the rate of last resort for a reason, because I think a lot of people who are unfamiliar with how electricity works, people who are maybe newcomers to Alberta, maybe they're renters, and so it's the first time getting a power bill. Maybe it's seniors who are accustomed to having the government regulate the rates for them. It gives the impression that they're protected, if you call it the regulated rate option. It gives the impression that it's stable. It gives the impression that that's the responsible choice to make. And it's the exact opposite. It is volatile, and we saw that last year when rates went up as high as 32 cents a kilowatt hour. And when people are prepared to have that kind of volatility, that's one thing. But if people think that they're being protected, then it causes a lot of hardship, and we can't allow that to happen any longer. So we want to be very clear with the public. We've been trying to get them to switch off the regulated rate option. calling it the rate of last resort, I think most people will say, wait a minute, I have better credit than that. I'm going to go out and seek a contract if I can get a better rate. And that's what we want people to do. We want people to look at whether it's a variable rate, if they can handle that fluctuation, or whether it's a fixed rate. We want to ensure that people understand that there are better rates for them out there so that they can reduce their power bills. And for those who don't have a choice, maybe they don't have access to good credit, or they are newcomers to the province, we're going to make sure that the companies set that rate based on a 2-year time horizon. I think you know, Bruce, because most people have had a mortgage before. If you have a longer-term mortgage, sometimes you can negotiate a better rate than if you have the up and down and instability of what would happen on a shorter-term basis. And that's what we're hoping will happen, is that you'll have a rate that will protect you much more than we've seen in the past. But if you want to get the best rates, then we'll be encouraging people to shop around.
It'll be way more transparent, no question about that. Premier, listen, we addressed a lot of things here. Thanks for your time as always, and we'll see you again.
You bet. Thanks, Bruce.
There is the Premier, Danielle Smith, joining us on the Alberta Update today. Well, Alberta's government is delivering on a commitment to put more police officers on the streets, hoping to deter criminal activity. Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Mike Ellis, is joining us to talk more about that and many other things. Good day, Minister. Always good to see you. Thank you. Thank you for popping by.
Thank you, and good day, Bruce.
Hey, Minister, let's start with this one, and allow me a little bit of preamble here. The RCMP is facing significant officer vacancy rates across many provinces, and I think some territories as well. As of February 2023, and I looked this up, some data obtained by the National Post revealed the RCMP is falling short of staffing levels in all 8 provinces and 3 territories where it has contracts. What is the impact of this officer shortage in Alberta? How are we feeling it here?
Well, quite simply, Bruce, especially it impacts rural Alberta. We're not getting 24-hour coverage in certain areas of rural Alberta. You talked about nationally. I think nationally there's about a 17% shortage on the amount of officers that we should have. It's even higher here in Alberta. The number is actually 21.6%. For your viewers, we have an authorized strength of 1,911, and we're about 413 officers short, and that impacts every jurisdiction that has RCMP policing right here in Alberta, and that doesn't come without a cost either. We as taxpayers and Albertans, are paying roughly about $16 million for services that we're not getting right now. And with the lack of 24-hour coverage is quite frankly unacceptable.
Okay, let's stay with this one. There's so much more to ask. The vacancy rate that you mentioned, obviously, is concerning when we consider rural crime. You touched on that, and anybody that lives in rural Alberta is well aware. But there seems to be an assumption that maybe we can spend our way out of this. Much of the vacancy rate, though, facing Alberta is a huge issue. What else would you say to that?
Well, certainly you're echoing some of the critics. Some of the critics will say, "Hey, if you just give X amount of dollars, we'll put more officers, on the street." At this time, my message back is, how about you give us the authorized strength level first, and then we can worry about more officers. I've had personal conversations about a year ago with the commissioner of the RCMP. He had indicated that his top issue had to do HR and was HR and recruiting, and I respect that. But my question back to him was, well, when are you going to resolve this? And his response back to me was, it's Ottawa, Minister, and that, quite frankly, is not a good enough answer for me. I don't have time for the RCMP to figure out whatever political concerns that they have with the federal government. We need boots on the ground now. We need action now, and that's precisely what we are doing, and that's why we have Bill 11 on the table. I need to get police officers out there. We need 24/7 coverage. We need to augment and support not just the RCMP, but augment and support every policing jurisdiction in this province. And as you're fully aware, Bruce, that's why we had officers on the streets of both Calgary and Edmonton.
Okay, well, you touched on it. Listen, I was going to ask you about it. So Bill 11, what more do we need to know, and how will it change things for the better?
Well, I think, as most of your viewers know, many of these sheriffs are already doing police functions. And with those police functions, and we're asking them, they look like police officers, they act like police officers, they're out there performing police-like functions. It only makes sense that these officers eventually transition to become police officers. And with becoming a police officer, we now have to be arm's length from government, and that's precisely what we're doing right now. We have requests from all over this province for SCAN teams, the Safe Community and Neighborhoods teams. We have the fugitive apprehension teams. We have officers out there that are doing highway patrol. These are already police functions, and it only stands to reason. Oh, and by the way, Bruce, I mean, we also have them out there backing up jurisdictions such as the RCMP if they need help. And let me just speak to our rural friends as an example. I mean, if I have a sheriff that is 5 minutes away from a call to service, and I hypothetically have an RCMP member that might be an hour away. I mean, when you're calling 911 and you need help now, not an hour from now. So that's precisely what we're doing.
Listen, do you want to touch on Coaldale? Many people reading the news are probably aware that something went on there, but for a bit of a setup, you had to step in and provide some financial support for the people of Coaldale because of a shortfall. Frankly, tell us more about why you did that.
Well, we're stepping up and, doing the job of quite frankly, the federal government, quite frankly. Look, Coaldale, I've said this for quite some time, that the federal government, Public Safety Canada specifically, not the RCMP, but Public Safety Canada, has been signal checking that they may not wish to continue with contract policing, not just here in Alberta, but quite frankly, right throughout Canada. Coaldale is the only jurisdiction that pays 100% of the costs for the RCMP services that they reserve. So, for example, in jurisdictions that are under 15,000, which is where Coaldale falls, it's a 70-30 split. So 70% paid by essentially us here in Alberta, and then 30% is paid by the federal government. Public Safety Canada not only will not allow them back in the provincial police servicing contract, but they've essentially ignored requests from our department. They've ignored from the Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP here in Alberta. So if that isn't a clear signal check that they don't want to continue with contract policing, I don't know what is. However, that doesn't mean that Coaldale needs to be disadvantaged. So again, the Alberta government, under the leadership of Premier Smith, we're stepping up to the plate, and we're making Coaldale whole until Coaldale can decide exactly what they want to do with their policing services in their municipality.
All right, listen, one more, and I want to focus on the big cities, Calgary and Edmonton. You have been a huge proponent. I've heard you say this many, many times. Police presence will help deter criminal activity. So you've committed more officers to Calgary and more officers to Edmonton. Where are we on that front, and how is that going?
Well, first of all, yes, we have committed to that. Officer presence does matter. I can tell you I've heard from both the Calgary and Edmonton police services. 25 in each of those jurisdictions are not only trained, but deployed on the ground right now. The other 25 in both municipalities are in various stages of recruiting and training and getting them deployed on the grounds. But let me just say this. I mean, I have both heard from Calgary and Edmonton that not only violent crime, but crime in general has decreased in those municipalities. Now, we can attribute that to various things, but some of the feedback that I get from constituents, some of the feedback that I get from just Calgarians and Edmontonians is, thank you. The officer presence is making a difference, and that officer presence is deterring crime. And so, the feedback that I'm getting from both police services, the statistics are starting to bear that out. Nice.
Good work, Minister. As always, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Mike Ellis, joining us on the Alberta Update. Well, the government is working to improve emergency response times, to increase EMS capacity, and support paramedics across this province. To do this, the province is investing an additional $25 million to fund the replacement, maintenance, and equipment of EMS vehicles. To bolster response times, Health Minister Adriana LaGrange saying the province is also finding ways to free up ambulances from doing non non-urgent transfers of patients between hospitals and other health facilities.
That Alberta Health Services has awarded contracts to 2 partners to provide scheduled, low-acuity, interfacility transfer services. These contracts in Calgary and Edmonton will provide non-urgent transfer services, bolstering the resources of our EMS system. So this strategic initiative will enable Alberta Health Services to help ensure that ambulances and paramedics are available to respond to emergency medical calls in Calgary and Edmonton and the surrounding areas.
It is estimated approximately 24,000 of these non-urgent transfers are needed in Edmonton, about 20,000 in Calgary. That's every year. This new contract will help free up those ambulances, of course, and paramedics to focus on emergency medical responses in Alberta's 2 largest cities. Minister LaGrange also announcing a chance for Albertans to take a more active role in the healthcare system. This week, Minister launching a recruitment for 12 new regional health advisory councils and an Indigenous advisory council. These new councils will make sure that regional voices and perspectives are included in the new refocused healthcare system. To learn more or to apply to be a member, you can visit alberta.ca/healthcare. Alberta's Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, pulling no punches when it comes to responding to the federal government's carbon tax. Protests against this increasingly not popular tax are ongoing in Alberta. Here's what the minister had to say recently.
Canadians are losing patience with the carbon tax and the lies that Justin Trudeau, Stephen Guilbeault, and the federal NDP Liberal coalition have been telling Canadians. Thanks to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, we know that Canadians pay more in carbon tax than they receive back from the federal government.
Based on our modeling, the majority of households will see a negative impact as a result of the carbon tax.
And as of last month, even Stephen Guilbeault admitted that they have no idea if the carbon tax has even reduced emissions. Things have gotten so bad that last month, Justin Trudeau even tried to rebrand their carbon tax. Unfortunately, this debacle doesn't end there. There's something called the Fuel Charge Proceeds Return Program. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. With all the news about the carbon tax, there has been little attention paid to this federal fund. It's been collected since 2019, and today it amounts to $2.5 billion. This portion of the carbon tax was supposed to go to small businesses. 5 years later, they are still waiting. And even though the federal government is legally obligated to return those funds to the provinces in which they were collected, they haven't done so.
You have about $2.5 billion that was supposed to be set aside for those who are disproportionately impacted by the carbon price, so farmers, small business owners, and Indigenous people, and you have yet all these years in to disperse that money.
So much for being revenue neutral. Small businesses in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, and Newfoundland have all been waiting since 2019. In Alberta alone, this amounts to $718 million that Justin Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault have taken out of the pockets of small businesses. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business has pointed out that if these carbon tax dollars were returned to the 175,000 businesses in Alberta, each business would receive $4,000. That's money that could be used to make payroll and keep the lights on. And to make matters even worse, before returning even a cent to businesses, Stephen Guilbeault has announced that they are cutting the rebates that will be available in the future. Stephen Guilbeault has no idea what he is doing, and small businesses across our country are paying the price. The federal government needs to stop the bleeding, cancel the planned cut, and return the $2.5 billion owed to small businesses that they have been holding hostage for the past 5 years, especially at a time when small businesses and Canadians are struggling. It is the very least that Stephen Guilbeault can do.
Now, just a couple of days ago, after the minister posted this video, the federal government finally announced in its budget that they would plan to return those promised funds. So some good work from the minister. Well, on top of the ongoing national inflation and affordability crisis are concerns, of course, over affordable housing. Alberta continues to have some of the most affordable housing costs in Canadians' major cities. No doubt, though, more housing and affordable housing solutions would help. Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services, that is Jason Nixon, is here now to talk more about this. And Minister, we appreciate the time.
Well, thanks for having me on, Bruce. It's good to see you.
Let's start with this. Your government providing record funding to Alberta's 48 housing providers for operating community housing access across the province in 2024. What will it mean, Minister, for Albertans?
You know, we're, as you said, Bruce, in your intro, we're really focused on making sure we increase supply on both affordable and market attainable housing in our province. But one of the things that we can't lose sight of is the fact that we already run, things like seniors housing for well over 110,000 seniors in our province, and that those nonprofit providers who partner with the province to keep care of some of our most vulnerable and the people who built our province are facing the same challenges that you and I are facing with the inflationary markets that we see, increased cost of heat. They're being impacted by the carbon tax to the tune of millions of dollars a year, unfortunately, from what the federal government is doing. And so we wanted to make sure that we're investing and making sure they can continue to maintain what we have while we build forward. And so we did increase their investment in operating money for those 48 providers to $75 million this year, which is an increase of 40%, which I think really reflects how much we value their work. But more importantly, frankly, what is taking place because of this inflationary crisis, and sending a clear message that we're going to continue to work hard to keep everybody housed in our province.
Minister, we know the federal government has been overstepping its jurisdiction when it comes to a lot of things with the provincial government. Certainly housing is another issue. Some of the funding that they've announced recently, bypassing, obviously, the province, going directly to some of those municipalities. And they also talk, they may be behind some of the blanket rezoning discussions that are happening. Let's talk a little bit about that, what it actually means and the impact that it might have on housing in Alberta.
Well, I think the biggest challenge we have when it comes to the conversation about blanket rezoning is the federal government has no business, period, full stop, even having this conversation. Well, we recognize as a province, and I know our municipal partners do as well, that we have to do work on removing red tape, increasing our ability to get faster access to development. That needs to be done with the province, who has jurisdiction over municipalities, and of course with municipalities who have elected councils, whose number one job is to do this work with their communities to be able to make sure that each individual municipality is being designed well. So first off, federal government's got no business doing that. We've made that clear, of course, with the introduction of some recent legislation, Bill 18, which is going to make sure that the federal government can't go around the provinces to make deals and put in unreasonable zoning targets. And instead, we're going to work closely with our municipalities to make sure that we're zoning in ways that work for individual communities and making sure that we're building houses faster and making sure that our great industry can do the job that they're doing.
Good point. Listen, if you listen to the federal government's spin on this, Minister, it's creative by them. What they're saying is, well, if you don't want the money, then I guess we won't give it to you. In other words, by not agreeing to what they're saying, are we turning away money in Alberta? What would your response be to them?
Well, first off, we're not going to be bribed with our own money to bring in rules and or regulations that will make our construction industry more expensive and therefore make more Albertans homeless, or make it that Albertans have to give up, frankly, even on the dream of home ownership long term, right? I mean, we're happy to bring in federal investment to our province, but not if it's going to cost us more in the long run, more than what that initial investment would be. And, one of the biggest concerns we have beyond zoning right now was that some of the federal money that has been discussed would come with, strings attached that the federal government has set around things like green building codes, or moving forward with our building code to be able to move Justin Trudeau's green agenda forward. And so something like that we wouldn't want to do because it's going to make life more expensive. But I want to be clear, we don't think that we're going to see less money as a result of moving forward with this. In fact, we think we're going to see more. Quebec has legislation like this. Quebec was the first province to get a housing deal done because the federal government knows they have to go work with the province, get a deal done, and then the province can work with all municipalities. And I'm happy to report, Bruce, I was just saying this to the Premier not too long ago today, that the federal government has already reached out and they have begun serious conversations with me as the housing minister in our province to be able to bring forward a long-term housing deal, which shows, again, this was the right call. So thanks to the Premier, because she hasn't even passed her bill, and we've already got the federal government back to the table working with us. And that ultimately is going to bring billions of dollars of affordable housing into this great province.
Well, some thanks to you, too, for standing up for us on that front. Listen, Minister, I noticed a recent CMHC report showing March has been a great month for housing starts in Alberta. Tell us a little bit more about the numbers that we saw, what they mean, and what we might be able to expect for the rest of the year.
So this entire year, we continue to see record-breaking months, sometimes the highest in history. March was the second highest March in the history of the province, but it also has us on track for our highest year yet. And we haven't even hit the heavy construction season, as you know, yet. We're already a third higher than we've ever been in history when it comes to residential construction starts. The other real important factor is we're seeing more and more purpose-built rentals, which is really, really critical to restore affordability in places like Calgary and across the province. So what this shows is that our work as a province with our industry to be able to reduce red tape and be able to create an environment that hardworking men and women can come in and be able to build the houses that we need is working. And so we're pretty excited about it. I believe that we possibly could double our construction capacity this year, which would be groundbreaking because, as you know, Bruce, the Alberta advantage right now is a lot of things, but it's also because we have the only place left with affordable housing in our country. And so we got to continue to be able to make sure we can maintain that advantage. We're excited. One other thing I would say about the CMHC report that I think doesn't get enough coverage, it really emphasizes some of the challenges that you're seeing in Canada when it comes to housing and housing affordability. But CMHC made clear that Alberta and the Prairie provinces are different. And that's because of the work that Alberta's government and places like Saskatchewan are doing on this issue. And we're anticipated to continue to lead the country to be able to make sure that we build enough housing to fuel our economy, but also make sure that Albertans can be able to continue to afford to live in their homes.
Listen, before I let you go, you recently handed out your ministry's Senior Service Awards. I would guess this is one of the best things about your job when you get to do that. Probably a lot of people you'd like to be able to highlight, but do you want to mention a couple before we let you go?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to be able to recognize the hardworking organizations and people who work to care for seniors in our province. I will mention one of my favorites, which is in my hometown of Sundre. One of our favorite daughters, the great Joyce Wicks, who has dedicated most of her life to caring for seniors in our community, who does everything from education for seniors, helping them get access to computers, helping deal with healthcare, also making sure they're there getting food, has just been one of those great dedicated people in our community to this passionate cause. And she received the All-Star Award of the Year, one of the highlights of my career to be able to present her that. We also saw some really great communities as well receiving recognition for their work to do to make sure that their communities are friendly. I will do a special shout out to Okotoks, who was recognized for the great work of being able to make sure that their community is a comfortable place for people, for the people that built their community, to be able to age in place and remain in the great community that they call home. So it was pretty exciting to do that. We have so many amazing organizations doing so much work. I actually hesitate even to start mentioning them because you just start thinking about all of them and then we'd be here all day.
Well, congratulations to everybody we didn't mention, certainly Joyce and Okotoks. Minister, always appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Good to see you.
There is the Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services, Jason Nixon, joining us on the Alberta Update. Well, with the 2024 growing season right around the corner, Minister of Agriculture R.J. Segerson, he wants producers to know that the Alberta government has their backs as we head into what could be another dry year.
I'm R.J. Segerson, Alberta's Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation. Agriculture is one of Alberta's key economic engines, but it's also the lifeblood of many communities across our province. With seeding right around the corner, I want to assure you that Alberta's government is taking steps to prepare for what could be another dry season. We've set up a drought command team, which is meeting with water license holders across the province and ensuring that producers have a seat at the table. For Budget 2024, my ministry is focused on water planning to support our ag and irrigation sectors. We are investing $5 million over 3 years for feasibility studies to expand or upgrade water storage systems, which are essential during dry years. Budget 2024 also earmarks another $19 million in capital grants for irrigation rehabilitation program, an increase of $5.5 million from last year alone, to help irrigation districts update their water infrastructure so they can do more within their current allocations. Additional capital funding of $50 million over 3 years is also designated for the water management program to complete vital projects like the Dixon Dam Capacity Enhancement Project. For our farmers and ranchers planning for the spring, I encourage you to check your insurance policies and to take advantage of the programming available through the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. Agriculture is challenging at the best of times, but the government and AFSC are committed to providing sustainable, stable business risk management and insurance supports, while working alongside producers and agribusinesses to support a strong, sustainable, and diverse industry into the future. In addition to other supports, like our water pumping program to help producers in dry years. We also provide timely information to help producers with management decisions during dry conditions and times of business stress, including the Alberta Crop Report, Alberta Climate Information Service, and other resources on the Farming and Dry Conditions webpage on alberta.ca. We know Alberta's farmers and ranchers have faced these challenges before, and the Alberta government will continue to do whatever we can to help producers impacted by drought so that the folks who are feeding our families are supported now and into the future.
There's Minister R.J. Segerson again. Hopefully, Mother Nature cooperates and we get a little bit more moisture, and that would be good for the producers in this province. Well, that does it for this episode of the Alberta Update. A look at what's happening in your province with your government. As always, thank you for joining us. You can tune in by going to YouTube and subscribing. A couple of different ways to do that. And again, we air this program 7 p.m. on Thursdays when the legislature is sitting, and every other Thursday when it is not. That'll do it for this week. Thank you for sharing some time with us, and we will see you again next week.